Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with Chris
Hello.
and Nate,
I have an apple. That's how you know I'm the bad guy.
and we are here tonight to discuss the poem "Considering Number Six" by Shawn Smith. However, before we get to that, I would like to say one other thing in honor of our new Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. I would just like to say that I like beer. So, that having been said, um, like I said last time, I wanted to, for the month of October, I'm doing creepy and disturbing poems, and I think this one fits the bill, considering number six and a serial killer meditating on his near future plans. Nate, would you like to start off? You have anything?
As I am not a person, you know, terribly civilized or British, I don't have many cups of tea. And I have to admit, this poem really was not one of them. Um, Honestly, it's not something I would go out of my way to read, just because the whole kind of creepifying doesn't do it for me. I'm like, there are enough bad things in the world without sort of, trying to get in, go and find it.
That's
That's
actually
I did find myself a bit, skeeved by this whole thing. So it seems like the author did a good job of capturing that mindset.
that's actually something I was kind of thinking about with this whole, October and Halloween in general, because like it is like there used to be a much clearer idea of what art was for, like what the purpose of art was, um, and it was kind of everyone pretty much agreed that it was to promote beauty was the purpose, and modernists and postmodernists came along um,
Ruined all
and
that.
yeah, um, and at the same time, like then there's the question of is is it a valid use of art to to look at these things, to think about these things, to go in these directions, um and because today's Halloween started out as a what would you call it, a side effect perhaps of All Hallows Day, which is the Catholic day of honoring all the rest of the saints that we don't have a day for on their own. Um, and this was the night before that, and it you know it has picked up all these other things over the years, and especially in the late 20th century, it's kind of become just a celebration of the creepy and weird and horrifying. So is that an okay thing? Is it a good thing?
I'm gonna say no. I'm
In,
not a real big fan of the Devil's Christmas.
Yeah, I've never really seen that much of the appeal of like Halloween in terms of the like gruesome and stuff, but I've also never been a big horror movie fan. It's just not really my thing.
am I the only horror movie fan here?
Um, well, by declaration, yes, you
Okay,
are.
okay. Well, okay. So very much off the poem itself, but I will say one thing in defense of uh, most horror movies and horror literature. And I don't. Most people don't seem to think of it this way. But in general, it is a very uh, moralistic genre. Like um, in most horror movies, in most horror stories, um, like it's not just like these things don't happen randomly. Um, like the people who get killed are basically killed because they are exhibiting some some vice, something that effectively invites the punishment on them. And it's not like you would say, oh well, that was just, but at the same time it is demonstrating, it is saying like these are things that have negative consequences. Does that, I don't know, does
Well,
that sound right?
yeah, I mean, there's a long history of that with like the grim fairy tales and stuff where, you tell your kids if they do this little thing wrong, there are going to be these amazingly horrible consequences. So you get them to act right. It's basically like an extension of that. I kind of feel like it's just not really been my thing. Like if you suck on your thumb, someone's gonna come and cut your thumbs off.
With scissors, and then he'll show up in a oh shoot, Terry Pratchett book.
Well, there you go.
But
I mean, no, what you're saying about all that is pretty true. And to go back to the question you're asking earlier, if this sort of exploration of the macabre and the dark and the gruesome is can appropriately be called art, I would say yes, because I mean one of the great literary classics, one of the defining things is Dante's Inferno or the Divine Comedy, which contains the Inferno, and that's some pretty grim and gruesome stuff going on there. I mean, it is not a pretty sort of tale, and so there's a place for it. Like Poe, I think, is legitimately an artist, and he wrote about, well, Poe stuff. You get the Pit and the Pendulum. You get like the Telltale Heart, which is like a quintessential horror story. You get Cask of Amontillado, which is one of the most terrifying stories to me ever because it's done in such cold blood.
what was the motivation there? Why did he do that in that story? I forget. I remember the story. I remember what he did, but I don't remember why.
Montresor, I believe, no, Montresor had been insulted. I believe it was just
Yeah,
some little slight, but he just took it way out of hand.
like a matter of family honor or something.
I'll have to remember. I will have to remember that. If we ever make an addition on the house and we're putting up a new wall. Okay, here's a place to store someone I need revenge upon to let them die horribly. We don't have basements though. I don't have a basement, so it would be more you'd have to soundproof it pretty well first.
Yeah. What's there? Oh, it's an old water heater spot, but I was worried about mold.
So, Chris, did you have anything on this particular poem or not really?
Well, okay, so this really isn't my sort of thing, but I do know people that are like really into like learning about serial killers and horror movies and stuff. So I could, it's more of a this really isn't my sort of thing instead of like this is terrible. But I do have to say I have read a couple of the Dexter novels, and those, like, that's another fictional work that kind of tries to put you in the headspace of a serial killer. And those I've seen the show. The show doesn't do as good a job of this because you're just kind of watching it. But in the novels, you're actually experiencing things from like Dexter's point of view. And it does do a pretty good job of pulling you into that headspace. But it's more like sort of like social anxiety, and like he just doesn't understand how people work. Like he's kind of distant. So it's sort of like the social awkwardness that you can sort of relate to. And then it's sort of brought into that. Like he'll be in situations where he's just like, I'm just not sure how like a normal person should react in this situation. Which even if as a normal person, not a serial killer, like you understand, it's like when you take just about any social situation and you try to break it down to its fundamental parts, it really doesn't make any sort of logical sense. It's like somebody says something that's not necessarily that funny, and everybody kind of gives a chuckle. Well, it's like that's just sort of a hey, yes, I'm a human too sort of thing that comes naturally to normal people, but not to a serial killer. So,
or to Mark Zuckerberg, apparently.
There are different kinds of serial killers. There's
right,
the you know this one. Dexter reads kind of like the sociopath.
right,
He can't relate to humanity. Like he's just kind of the whole empathy, like the whole empathizing and relating to human thing is broken. Note, if any of you out there in viewer land are like psychology students and super, super angry about what we're saying because we're getting it wrong, none of us are. Sorry, we're kind of going by what we know off the cuff. But back to what I was saying. And that's kind of what the subject of this poem strikes me as too, because the usual serial killer, if my police procedurals have informed me correctly, generally they like to stick to one MO, and they don't like to switch it up. They're like, nope, I'm doing this. I'm going to keep doing this, and we're going to keep on going. And that's
Yes, as fiction, it is inaccurate in that aspect. I
well,
don't know. I think it would be more.
that's all the ones that we know about. Because you would think that a killer who varies his methods often, you wouldn't
Could
link
get
it all
away with
together.
it longer,
Yeah,
or
well,
it would
might not
be
protected
it would
because
be
it
harder to
the
pin them
bunch of
all.
separate stuff.
It would be harder to pin them all on him.
right. To
True.
be fair, in the poem, it seems like he's trying to figure out what his MO is going to be. Like he's searching for the right feeling.
So
I'm
whether or
hoping
not
considering
you
number
like it,
seven turns into Batman whooping somebody's ass, but
Nate, your voice kind of keeps going in and out, and I don't think it's just the apple. Like you occasionally start sounding muffled. Do you know why that might be? Okay. Yes, that too. Um,
no, I don't know.
okay.
Kind of hoping that considering number seven turns into Batman beating the crap out of somebody.
So okay, not so much to either of your taste. In terms of like emotional effectiveness, as in like, does this get the effect it's going for? Well, what effect do you think it's going for, and does it achieve that?
I feel like it's sort of going for revulsion, and yes, it is successful.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing reading it, you're like, and now I feel greasy. Awesome.
Yeah, it's like we don't have any of the stuff that Dexter does, where it sort of puts you in the mindset and then you see the terrible stuff. This is just the terrible stuff in your present state of mind without trying to acclimate it at all. So there's going to be just a very like a very real sort of tension there that's just not comfortable.
Well, and also, this is a sonnet. The 14 lines, three 4-line stanzas, and the 2-line turn, the 2-line change at the end, and in an effective Shakespearean sonnet, that 2 lines is supposed to kind of reorient the whole thing, make the entire thing look different. And I think this one achieved that. I think the last 2 lines make you turn around and look at the whole thing over again pretty well.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because you're like,
Nate,
it sounds like the guy's kind of sitting. At first I'm like, okay, this dude's sitting in here muttering about what he's going to do next. Then it's like, oh, nope.
Well, it almost starts off as sort of a confession where you can see like especially like of course about Anne, I shot her. Like it's almost like that could be somebody talking to the police or something. But then whenever you get to like, I'll have to try a different way, it's like, oh wait, no, he hasn't been caught. He's still going.
And then you find out that, you know, he's talking to the person who apparently is the next in line, which that's the
Well, I mean, the way I read it was that the audience is the victim.
well, yeah, he's what would be, I'm trying to think of what the like literary term with that he is addressing, like in the fictional situation, the narrator is addressing the next person. So yes.
Is that monologuing to borrow a Incredibles term?
Well, you know, maybe if she's very lucky, you know, he gets distracted enough that she's able to work out something.
Yeah, I get the feeling she's trussed up pretty well.
Or someone comes in and rescues her at the last moment.
Batman.
I'm trying to think of any Batman villains that would no, this would just be like this would be just be a guy who shows up in one episode and then he's like, you know, he's never it's you know, a one moment thing.
He's one of those old villain of the week villains.
Okay, well, kind of sounds like well, do either of you have anything else you want to add about the poem or about like creepy horror in general?
Not particularly.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Okay.
I feel like we're sort of letting down the side on this one, not having more to say, but on its technical merits, the poem accomplished what it was aiming for. It's just that what it was aiming for was like, yeah.
Okay. Well,
like beers by Stone Brewing. It's like, yep, nope, they're very, very strong and bitter. Not gonna drink it anymore.
it's a okay, we can do a short one tonight. So for those interested, if I can get everything set up on Monday, I plan to post my recording of Edgar Allan Poe's "The Bells" to continue the Halloween and horror theme. And actually, this one was I initially picked this one up at Chris's recommendation. I had not heard of this one before, and it's interesting. And I think I think we could have a longer conversation on that one.
Like honestly, my side will just me be going on and on about how I just love it without any actual like technical contributions.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll have to see what Nate and I can pull off then.
I'll just and kind of like chew it thoughtfully. Just
okay. Well, in that case, good night, everyone.
Have a good one.
I finished my apple.